on the 0 hour. I am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Certain moments are like X-rays or flashes of ultraviolet light. They reveal the surface beneath the skin. And this is one of those moments. I wanted to talk about it very much with my next guest. You know her. She's been on the program before, but you've known her work for many years. Marianne Williamson is a teacher, an author. Her books include A Return to Love and books on healing the soul of America, among other things. She is a former presidential candidate. I'm sure I'm leaving out multiple credentials as well, but I know she has a new podcast. So welcome to the exciting world of podcasting. And without any further ado, Marianne Williamson, thanks so much for coming back on the program.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
Well, it's always wonderful to talk to you. And obviously, we're all talking and thinking about the events on Capitol Hill. And there are certain moments in life, illuminating moments in life, it seems to me, where it's simultaneously a shock and we knew it was coming, right? And this feels like one of those moments to be, but maybe we can start there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, all of us are shocked. Some of us figured it was coming. White supremacist, Proud Boy, skinhead type groups have been plaguing this nation for a long time, particularly Black people, but also Jews, gay people, immigrants, etc. Now that our esteemed Congress people have found themselves in the line of fire, they're willing to wake up to it and try to do something about it. But that's just the immediate story. In the larger sense of things, this has been coming for many decades. America is having to face a painful reckoning right now. We have been for at least 40 years. I mean, obviously, we've had places where we were not everything we purported to be since our founding. But particularly in the modern era, over the last 40 years, as you and I are certainly in agreement on all this, there has been such a withdrawal of governmental and economic support for the principles on which we stand, and therefore for the people of the United States, the earth on which we live, that the tension rumbling underneath the surface of things, the agitation rumbling underneath the surface of things was bound to find volcanic expression, and that it found volcanic expression in one man named Donald Trump. But this is a sociological phenomenon which is not new. Large groups of desperate people are routinely a petri dish out of which some kind of mass psychosis on a societal level is likely to emerge. This is how Hitler gained a foothold in Germany. Desperate people in groups, large groups of desperate people, are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. Many of us have been yelling about this, talking about this, naming Trump for what he is for years. And right now, to hear all these, I love it, don't you? All these people who have aided and abetted him for 4 years and longer, who all of a sudden say this must be condemned. But I just want to complete by saying, I still have faith. In the long run, we're going to be a better country for all this. We're being humiliated in front of the world, embarrassed in front of the world, brought to our knees with the realization of how fragile our democracy is, how inept the institutions are that are meant to protect us, how paper thin is the buffer between us and utmost catastrophe. COVID has shown us this. This has shown us this. We're all beside ourselves today. What happened there? Were the Capitol Police infiltrated? What went on there? They invited these people in, basically. They carefully and politely escorted them out. If these people had been Black who did this, God help us, they'd probably be dead. So I'm thinking what I'm sure millions of Americans are thinking today. And I believe that this is the crisis. I hope this is the crisis that will be the initiatory experience that challenges us, confronts us, and ultimately makes us to evolve into the next stage of our evolution.
You know, I love the hopeful thought, and to a large extent, I share it, Marianne. But you know, I think of that 12-step phrase: "Half measures availed us nothing," which, as I understand it, does not mean half measures avail us half. It means 100% or nothing. And to me, my concern, of course, is that the political establishment may respond as it has been inclined to respond with what I would call, it would be complimenting them to call them half measures, that it would, you know, a few $100s here, maybe if you made less than $75,000 in 1969 and you're a Sagittarius and you're, you know, I mean, these complicated rules. So not stepping, I mean, I feel we're in a state of multiple emergencies: health, economic, even socio-psychological, and to just say the usual tinkering around the edges is going to make things all right, and then the top line economic numbers may look a little better, and we'll get nice press releases from the Department of the Treasury or whatever. But I'm concerned that we have an opportunity here to recognize the depth of the problem. And I want to make sure we do recognize the depth of the problem. Do you got what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I not only am concerned about it, I expect it. They just easily reelected Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. That means that basically the entire Democratic Party, in terms of the House of Representatives, had declared itself okay with the kind of incrementalism that you just named. And of course, if Chuck Schumer is made majority leader, it will be the same. So of course, I have the same concern about the corporatist leadership of the Democrats. The Republicans have been bought hook, line, and sinker by the corporatist mentality. The Democrats try to, as you said, tinker on the side, ameliorate some of the suffering on the periphery, but they too have proven themselves unwilling to challenge the underlying corporate forces that make all that suffering inevitable, because, of course, they're taking the money too. But the people of the United States are onto them. And I think that in many ways, the election of Donald Trump was an, albeit wrong-minded, still on a certain level emotionally legitimate cry of rage. That's why I think if Bernie Sanders had been the nominee in 2016, I think Bernie would have beaten him. Bernie and Trump were the only people in that election, in that campaign season, to name the rage, to name people's pain, to validate what people knew in their gut, which was that the economy was rigged against them. And it was rigged against them in a way which neither Democrats nor Republicans had been willing to stop for the last 40 years. And there was a hope that maybe an outsider would help. So I believe that the recognition that this whole thing is corrupt is even broader now. As you said, I loved your analogy about the ultraviolet light. The entire political establishment, to the extent to which it is held hostage by corporate forces whose money they feel they cannot live without, has proven itself not only not a friend or protector of the American people, but actually a conduit of assault on the poor, a dangerous element. Our government is actually, in many ways, oddly enough, ironically enough, but in the exact opposite way that Reagan said it, the problem. And I think this is going to be a rough ride, but my optimism, I mean, you're right. You mentioned half measures avail us nothing. We might not make it. The American experiment might be over. However, by electing Biden, and as I see it, we didn't go over the cliff. We're still 2 inches away from the cliff. They have the Senate, they have the House, they have the White House. If those people do an Obama, and the way Obama in 2008 to 2010, he had all three, and he played footsies under the table with those corporate forces. He did not do an FDR. And I think that's really what we're getting down to. Either Biden will do an FDR or we're in big, big trouble. He must, and I don't believe he has 2 years to do this. I think he has 100 days to prove to the American people he's doing this. I think there needs to be a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity into the life of the average American, with cancellation of the loan debts, with Medicare for all, I think there should be a serious conversation about repealing that 2017 tax cut, putting back in the major tax cuts. Let's have a serious conversation about stopping those corporate subsidies, a serious conversation about, not just a conversation. Now, once again, Biden has already spoken some half measures, such as free college. But if he comes in full FDR, then we have a chance. If he doesn't, I have the same concern and fears that you do.
The phrase that keeps coming to mind for me, Marianne Williamson, is, and I probably used it a couple times on the show already, is cognitive dissonance. When I think about the people who rioted on Capitol Hill, when I think about the people who sympathize with them and support them in various ways, what I think about, I think most of all, is the notion that they, like all of us, have been told for decades that things are fine, when we know, just like an abused child knows, that, and I'm not demeaning any of us by saying that, because I have great respect for children, that things are not fine. And so...
Sorry, what was the last thing you said?
They know, as we know, that things are anything but fine. Things are not at all fine. But when, when we have, for example, Hillary Clinton saying she's going to run as Obama's third term, well, people may or may not have known it intellectually, but people knew that as that second term was coming to an end, for most of us, things were not great and had been getting worse, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, for decades. And so, I think there's a reflexive response, understandable, of revulsion on, among liberals and Democrats and so on, towards the rioters and the violence. And I fully understand that. But I think it's also important to look at the underlying dissonance and abandonment behind the dissonance, even abuse, to kind of build on what you said, that generates that rage. I think, and I guess what I'm driving at is that I'm worried about the impulse among rank and file liberals, like your friends, my friends, a lot of people we know, a lot of Democratic voters, to just like dismiss them again as deplorables without recognizing that they are reflecting something that we all have a responsibility to address. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I think that actually that's just what I just said. I don't agree that they didn't intellectually understand what they were doing. They totally did. When Hillary said, let's have the success of the last 8 years with Obama, millions of Americans said, the success of the last 8 years, I'm drowning here. And so absolutely, there was a cry of rage. They were offered by Bernie was a progressive populist. Trump was an authoritarian populist. But that populist cry of rage, I believe, was going to run up from the bottom of things. Now, in addition to that, you had the fact that the Democrats then suppressed the Bernie campaign so that they didn't have the option of going with the progressive populists. All they had was Hillary or the authoritarian populist. But I was not surprised in 2016, horrified as everybody else was, but not deeply surprised that they went with the populist candidate. Now, once the populist candidate became president, he made things exponentially worse, including, and this is usually true when you have an authoritarian phenomenon like that, whether it's Hitler or anyone else, they pick a group to scapegoat because they're basically promulgating a master race type theory. So the white supremacy that was already here was stoked so deeply by Trump saying, not only has it been rigged, not only are you being treated unfairly, but the real problem is the Mexicans, the real problem is the blacks, the real problem is the Jews, the real problem with the gay people. Even when he didn't come out and say it about certain groups, the underlying code was always there. So so there were all this confluence of dynamics, including, by the way, I think a crisis of the American male. A crisis of such displacement. So, because with that economic, one of the things I saw, Richard, when I lived in Michigan, and I counseled many, many blue collar workers through some of very, very difficult economic times. And one of the things that I would see, now this is a generalization, but it was my experience. If a woman loses her job, it's bad. She doesn't know how she's going to feed her kids. She doesn't know how she's going to pay the rent. I'm not saying her stress and anxiety is any less. But for a man, I saw over and over again, it was a psychic crisis, a psychological and emotional crisis that went beyond the economic crisis. It was humiliation before his wife and children. Right. It was the sense that his entire manhood, because so much of it is about productivity. For women, it's about relationships. For men, it's about productivity. And I respect all the fluidity of sexual identity going on now, but those dynamics still exist in all of us, regardless of what our identity is. And I would see how much crumbling there was among men when confronted by economic hardship that got them in the gut, got them in the very sense of self-identity, self-respect, and self-confidence. You and I and others have talked a lot about drugs, about alcohol, and so forth. So this tragedy, so many aspects of this tragedy have been building up. And then you add to that the overall societal compromise. And I think for this, all of us have to look at ourselves, by which we were willing to let something go here, let something go there, not yell as loud as we might have when something went wrong over here. We're willing to go along over there. And it all just came and is coming to a head. Now, I believe that there are enough people among us who are ready for repair. You talk a lot about 12 steps. We need to 12-step the United States. I mean, the whole point of the person who has come to the point of realizing, I can't manage my life. My life is unmanageable. That's what the United States has to face now. This situation is unmanageable. Forget thinking, can the Democrats manage it or the Republicans can manage it? The situation is unmanageable. That brings you to your knees, and that's exactly where this country needs to be right now. And we need to take an inventory. We need to take a moral inventory. We need to look at our national character defects. We need to make amends in forms such as reparations. Right. We need to atone, and we need to do the hard work of course correction. And I believe as a nation, we will find what individuals find. You do that work, and it works.
And, it's interesting you mentioned that, Marianne Williamson, because what I always understood, for example, about the 12 steps is the concept that you look at your side of the street, that you look at the wrongs you've done or what you might have done better, and you try to improve that. And it seems to me that too much of, again, I'll sort of broadly say our side, liberalism or whatever, we look at the red states or the Trump voters or whomever it might be, and we condemn them and we judge them and we dismiss them. But my training, for lack of a better word, is, well, what could I and people like me have done better? So, for example, I look at people who focus on immigration. They hate immigrants, disgusting opinions. I mean, I'll be clear about it. They hate immigrants. They want to end abortion. They want to carry guns everywhere they go, into Starbucks and all that. What do those three things have in common? If people feel that their way of life is dying, that their community and their security is under assault, they want to defend themselves physically, the guns. They want to make sure their population survives, the abortion, and they want to make sure their culture doesn't die, the immigration. Let me be very clear. I'm not endorsing any of these positions. What I'm saying is that my side of the street, I think, but I want your thoughts, ought to be telling them, no, that's not why you're suffering. You're not suffering because there are more people of color than there used to be. You're not suffering because women have reproductive rights. And these things are not the threats to you you perceive them to be. You've been misdirected. And it's my obligation to try to speak with you about it, human to human, equal to equal, because that's my side of the street. Whatever you've done wrong in being in indulging in racism and doing these things, I have it, if I want to engage in public life in any way, I have an obligation to try to engage you, that person who thinks that, and make the case for a better way of looking at it. What do you think of that?
Well, I think all of us have to look at ourselves. I don't think God is asking us to monitor other people's path, but to monitor our own. We go nuts at the thought that Trump doesn't have enough empathy, but we're not exactly filled with empathy for those who don't agree with us. We don't have empathy sometimes for people who agree with us if they don't agree with us about every little thing. Right. So all of us need to first, as Gandhi said, be the change. All of us need to look at our own hearts. Am I the person that I think everybody else ought to be? There are many elements going on there, but I think that you're pointing to something extremely important about a fear of psychic annihilation that is at the root of this. I do come from a minority. I'm a woman and I'm a Jew. Not that women are a minority, but obviously we have not been made to feel over the last few thousand years that we were truly equal most of the time. But particularly also as a Jew, I'm used to a life in which I recognize how wonderful it is that we are multicultural, how wonderful it is that we are a religiously pluralistic society. I live a life which leads me to glory in, be grateful for, give praise and thanks for multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity, and religious pluralism. However, what's happening now, exactly as you said, there are some people, white, Christian, men, they thought this country was ours and other people could basically, we were allowed to be there. But the idea of true full partnership rather than dominator model, the idea that truly everyone gets to thrive has been a very terrifying notion to many people. So then and this is the fault of both Democrats and Republicans, those people experience less and diminished economic and social opportunities, it was pretty easy for an authoritarian to say, the problem is the Black people. The problem is the immigrants. The problem is those Jews, rather than the problem is that our government has been taken over, held hostage by a small matrix, although they're huge in economic power, a matrix of corporate aristocracy, health insurance companies, but pharmaceutical companies, chemical companies, big agricultural companies, gun manufacturers, fossil fuel companies, defense contractors. And they, with the aid of the Koch brothers and other sources, the Mercers, et cetera, have been able to basically legally bribe members of political leaders to work more to advocate for the short-term profit of that corporate aristocracy than to advocate for the safety, health, well-being, and pursuit of happiness of the vast majority of Americans. And we have not made our case because too many people on the left deferred to the messaging of the traditional Democratic establishment that did not want to make the real case, because if they made the real case, they'd have to own their own part in that.
Right.
The only way to override big truth, big lies, and that's what Trump is. He's one big lie technique. You can't override that except with big truth. And the Democratic Party hasn't wanted to tell big truth. It's been the half measures, half truth. It's been half truth after half truth after half truth. And I can tell you from my own experience, and I know you know how this works as well, the Democratic establishment seeks to peripheralize anybody within their ranks who wants to tell big truth for the aforesaid reasons. But I think, once again, I think that the crisis is often what precipitates the ultimate problem solving. Once again, going back to the literature that you know well, every problem comes bearing its own solution. There's a solution inherent in all this in many ways that's easier to find than it was 10 years ago.
Oh, I think that's right. And I guess I'll just conclude by saying I think humans are pattern-seeking creatures. And I think that Democrats, by not wanting to tell the whole truth, are not offering a pattern. So people are just saying there's no there. And Republicans, with their cynicism and not just Trump, although he's the worst, but their inclination towards authoritarianism, they present a pattern. It's the blacks, it's the Jews, it's the elites, the liberal, and a lot of voters say, hey, that's a pattern, I'll go with it. So, but I think what you said is true and important. And when we talk about, the last 10 years and having more opportunity than in the last 10 years, I would say maybe even in the last 10 months, given the rise of COVID, I know you on social media the other day said, that the Democrats, by failing to offer, I'm paraphrasing, but that the Democrats, by failing, oh no, that's not what I wanted to quote. This is what I wanted to quote. That you did feel more optimistic, and that those of us who have been involved in this stuff for some time, which includes us, have seen movement, which is and progress and I would say openings, opportunities for change that are cause for optimism. I certainly feel that, while at the same time feeling, my show's called The 0 Hour because I feel like we don't have a lot of time to get this right now. But I do feel that sense of optimism, and I got some pushback for echoing you on that, of people saying, no, people saying, no, things suck. This is, and I don't think that's an empowering viewpoint, but I also don't think it's accurate. So I'm wondering if you want to say something about that.
Yeah, Martin Luther King said repeatedly how much he loved this country and how much he had faith. And he used to say, I'm not here to ask for something that is new. I'm here to cash a check that was given to us in our Declaration of Independence. Too many people on the left think it's not cool to talk about the Declaration of Independence. They think it's not cool to talk about even the Constitution sometimes. But it's the Declaration of Independence, the ideals in the Declaration of Independence, that is the rock on which we stand. And I believe that the fact that we are unwilling sometimes, some people on the left are unwilling to recognize the power of those first principles, because 41 signers of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were slave owners. I understand that. But the principles, that's the irony of American history. You have a document that 56 men risked their lives in order to sign, because if they had lost the war, they would have been executed as traitors against the King of England. It is true that 41 of the 56 were slave owners, and that dichotomy is built into the DNA in this country between those who appear in every generation, willing to do anything, to sacrifice anything in order to stand on and to further those principles and to expand the franchise that they establish, versus those who have always been with us in every generation. They were there at the beginning in the form of slave owners, and they're there today in various forms, which represent forces backed by a lot of money and power, who are willing to transgress against those principles in order to retain their power and money, and are willing to resort to the most heinous forms of violence in order to do that. For us to see that struggle is eternal in American history, to see that struggle is the template of American history, is to recognize that other generations have faced it before. The abolitionists had to have had faith that getting rid of slavery was possible. Women suffragettes had to have faith that gaining women the right to vote was possible. Civil rights workers had to have faith that desegregating the American South was possible. And we have to have faith that overthrowing the current contemporary form of corporate monopolistic overreach is possible, because that's the common denominator in all of those situations. When you talked about, I think it's interesting, the comment you made about people responding to patterns, and people respond to conviction. The Republican corporatist really believes that shit. They have a lot of conviction behind it. And yet Democrats too often say things behind which it's difficult to have real conviction, because there's not the level of radical truth telling there needs to be. Now, what's going to happen now, it's writings on the wall. Republican Party is practically going to split in two now. Who's going to win? We don't know. Same with the Democratic Party. But with the Democratic Party, and one of the things is, of course, the issue on the left now, Bernie has been that one voice that has held so much together. Now we have a lot of great progressive voices, yourself included, but we don't have that center point, and we need to address that. That might not be a person, a candidate, but something. It's almost like we need a manifesto, we need a document. Because otherwise progressivism will continue to be peripheralized by Chuck and Nancy et al.
And diluted. And I have a final thought, and then I will leave the last word to you, if that's okay, Marianne Williamson. And my final thought, since you mentioned slavery, and since I talked about my side of the street, of course, slavery is the most deplorable institution in our history, and I don't question that. But these signers of the Declaration of Independence and so on were probably just following what they thought people did, right? It was a social norm of the time, as repellent and monstrous as it is to have slaves. My side of the street, I can't go back and change them, but I can wonder every day, if I remember, what do I assume about my society and my way of life that will be as monstrous in the light of future progress, or as perhaps as slavery is to us today? What do we take for granted, whether it's in our economic relationships, our gender relationships, our racial relationships, our relationships to our children? We could go on and on, vegetarianism or so on. What is it in our world that I personally am not thinking about, that if I had the wisdom of 200 years from now, I would do differently? That's my daily kind of exercise. And that's my final thought, I guess.
I don't want to say anything that would indicate there's something worse than to enslave another human being. However, in answer to your question, I think if we make it, years from now, generations will look at how we've treated the earth, our continued assault on nature, our continued willingness for the sake of profits for fossil fuel companies to rape the earth, to systematically destroy our own habitat. I think that would be the main thing that future generations would look back on and go, what could they have been thinking?
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. But Marianne Williamson, as always, thank you for all your fine work. And it's always wonderful to talk to you.
Right back at you, Richard. It's always great to talk to you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Our pleasure. And we'll be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.